Okay, so we're mostly going to be talking about Loki, the premiere, but I also wanted to make a couple comments about Bad Batch, just because we only have one Bad Batch to talk about, and we talked about six last time. But we did kind of get a moderate resolution to some of the stuff we talked about last time. It turns out the cloaked figure is probably Rex. At the same time, I think it's entirely possible that we could see Maul in some capacity, but we thought it was going to be Bail Organa or Maul. I hadn't even considered that it should be Rex, and I feel like I should have caught that.
Well, yeah, he could just be another cloaked figure completely, and then he's there to throw off this other cloaked figure.
When they went over to Braca, I thought we were going to possibly see 12 or 13-year-old Cal. I don't know if they would throw that into this show. The fact that they put Braca at all was probably just a little bit of an Easter egg towards Jedi Fallen Order.
I think it would be a little redundant if you're like, oh, here's Kanan as a 12-year-old, and now here's Cal as a 12-year-old too.
Well, that's
they
partially...
gotta mix it up a little more.
That's partially why I thought that, but then I was like, yeah, I think they were worried about redundancy slightly. I think we are finally getting into a little bit of the nitty-gritty of the plot, finally. I think 7 was a little bit more of a filler episode as well, but we did get some sort of semblance with Rex advancing the plot, and now presumably all of them have their chips taken out. They made it a point for Omega to be like, I don't have an inhibitor chip. But I feel like she might actually secretly have one, and she just wasn't told that she has one. I really think there's going to be some sort of thing where somehow, towards the end, I think she's going to possibly be activated somehow. I think maybe it's not even necessarily an inhibitor chip. Maybe she has some sort of thing that's not a chip where they can control her.
It's like the Extremis or something from Iron Man, but like it's in her bloodstream.
I don't know if we'll get Ahsoka at all in the show. I wouldn't mind it, but my thought would be like, I don't know if Ashley Eckstein would come back.
Well, I think she's getting her own show, so they're probably like saving her for her own thing.
That was mostly all I had. I liked the fact that we got some Rex, and I was disappointed in myself that I hadn't even considered that it could be him in the cloak. Like you said, it's possible that he somehow got the same holo message, like maybe they did send it to like multiple people, like maybe it was Maul. But I think, based on him saying, yeah, I got some sort of trace from Rafa and Trace or something like that. He's like, I traced the signal or somehow, and they told me that I could find you here. Maybe Trace and Rafa are working for both sides. That's all I could really think of if there was Maul. I think they could still, the door is still open for them to introduce him in some other capacity, though. So now, getting into Loki, what were your thoughts on that first episode? We had a couple different talking points.
Well, I think everybody knew that if there was going to be a slam dunk show for them, Loki was going to be it. It started off exciting. They're escalating the way a lot of manga series do. A lot of mangas have where there's like some boss bad guy that they have to like build up, and it's so arduous to defeat, and then later on it's like they can take out an army of those like they're nothing. So now like Infinity Gems are just like whatever.
One thought I had early on in the show, when he was in the little, like, Timekeeper Secretary of State line, and they had that little video montage thing, I wondered if that was in any way related to the commercials that we got in WandaVision. I'm almost kind of wondering if the Timekeepers had anything to do with the WandaVision show, and it's like, I don't know if I'm just overthinking it, or I don't know if that's going to be somehow connected.
I mean, it's going to cross over in some capacity.
They kind of hinted at the fact that there could be, like, more Mephisto Easter eggs. When the little girl gestured over to the little design on the window or whatever, it was a devil-looking thing. You mentioned that that's probably just an allegory for Loki. You kind of said Loki in lore is basically devil characteristics.
Yeah, and the director has said that too, I guess, in interviews. Like, that's just a coincidence. They might just, like, keep teasing Mephisto now for the sake of teasing Mephisto. A lot of, like, ancient folklore is, like, the devil is, like, the new generation that's, like, shaking things up, and, like, the gods are, like, the old order of, like, trying to maintain the status quo, and, like, the ram horns are always, like, a symbol of that. That's why, like, the devil has horns, and there's, like, some versions of the Bible where, like, Moses has horns, or he's like the ram of God and not the lamb of God. That's why Aries is like the ram, and it's like the start of a new zodiac cycle. Thor and Loki are basically Jacob and Esau, where Thor is like the man's man who's like supposed to inherit everything, and Loki's like the smart trickster who got like disinherited but like tricks his way into power.
I almost wondered when they did that, I almost wondered if they re-edited the show or just like went back and made that, because I think they might have realized like how invested in figuring out where Mephisto is everybody was with the WandaVision show, and even so much as the Falcon and the Winter Soldier show too. A lot of people were trying to figure out like, oh, this is Mephisto, that's Mephisto. I almost wonder if they like recut it and to include that, in order just to mess with people, because I kind of agree, and I could be wrong about this, but I believe at some point in the original Avengers movie, I think Loki referred to himself as the devil at some point. I think that might have been a dialogue of his referencing him as the devil. Might further Easter egg back to that. And also, like you said, it's kind of an allegory for it. And also, Owen Wilson's character did say the variant that we're chasing is you. You also pointed out that the little cube cylinder thing that the little girl had is sort of like frost giant color. I don't exactly know what the symbols represent. You did say it's supposed to be a bunch of different frost giants, which could also kind of Easter egg at Loki being a main talking point.
I wouldn't have realized that on my own probably, but I had read something that said that like the blue is supposed to be kind of frost giant imagery.
And that makes sense. That's a kind of sneaky way of hinting at the overlapping like outcome of the thing, like the theme of the show. Like that could make sense, like that they're hinting at it early, and then obviously Loki in some capacity is going to be the hero and the villain, I think, in this case. There was some talk that the cloaked figure at the very end is possibly going to be Lady Loki, which would make sense. That would make what Owen Wilson said truthful. It also kind of makes sense because I believe that Lady Sif is going to be in the Jane Foster Thor movie in some capacity, and so therefore they could go with the Sif being turned into a version of Loki. We also kind of talked about how it's possible that the cloaked figure could be Doctor Doom. I'm not subscribing to that, but we both kind of said that might be a tease, like the cloak and like the eerily standing in flames type deal could be a way to try to get people along that line of thinking. I have heard that there is an attempt to revamp Fantastic Four yet again, so I don't know if like including him as kind of the villain in this is a way to set him up for later. I mean, for all we know, that person at the very end has absolutely nothing to do with the rest of the show. I mean, they kind of tease that like that person's going to be the threat for the show, but for all we know, that's just in that specific timeline, somebody went back and is messing with it. It could be several villains. Maybe that is Doom, and like maybe the next episode there's going to be somebody else messing with the time stream somehow.
Yeah, I think we're finding that ending on the cloaked figure shaded out cliffhanger is very overused right now, and lots of characters wear those, so I guess it works because it's like that Guess Who game where it's like, oh, are they wearing a cloak?
We also kind of talked about how like it's probably unlikely at this point just because nothing has been this outcome in the past, but since Mephisto can be whatever and look like whatever, that could just be like a meta thing where he's wearing a cloak, but he doesn't really need to wear a cloak, but maybe he just made himself look like that, and obviously he would be able to withstand standing in a pile of flames or whatever if that was really him, but like he has probably no need to screw with the timeline. Or
I think we're ultimately going to find that Mephisto is some urban legend that doesn't actually exist, but people try to talk about and like threaten people with, like a Baba Yaga or like a ghost story or like a you better behave or Mephisto's gonna get you. And it's not like, it turns out there's no literal Mephisto there.
Do you think they're gonna do Mephisto like how they kind of did Mandarin in Iron Man 3, where he was just some drunk guy that they put on camera, like that kind of thing? Like it's a meta version of what they did in Iron Man 3 with Mandarin, where they made Mandarin out to be like some terrorist or whatever, but it was just some drunk guy on camera that they used to intimidate people. And like in this case, fans are talking up every little thing or every little Easter egg. They got their microscopes out trying to figure out like what is an Easter egg for Mephisto or what's teasing at something or other being Mephisto, and it turns out, like you said, it's just going to be some urban thing. The version of the MCU Mephisto doesn't even actually exist.
Yeah, I mean, they could throw in the remake of the actor guy and do that. I guess the real Mandarin is supposed to show up in the Shang-Chi movie. So there is a real Mandarin. And also, apparently, like, the bald guy with the scar on his face who's, like, torturing Tony and Yinsen in the cave is Raza from the Starjammers. And this, like, they made that before, like, Disney bought them and the movie rights got all contentious. But yeah, Raza's, like, technically a X-Men character who is on the Space Pirates team that Cyclops' dad is in charge of. So that's a thing I read recently that I didn't realize, but that's super off point.
The last kind of talking point I had was we talked about how since this show seems to be kind of dealing with time, and time is seemingly like the main plot device of the whole show, it's entirely possible that the ones fighting against the TVA or whatever are the very conquerors of time, the Kangs of the universe or whatever. It's possible that there could be one Kang that's attacking several different timelines and going around and killing members of the TVA, or several, since there are either millions, billions, or trillions of Kangs in all these different timelines and universes and multiverses, whatever. You said that there is going to be a Kang at some point, like later on, as kind of the Thanos level villain that could spread across like several, I guess, independent Marvel movies, but since there are several Kangs, this could just be one of them, and then maybe they'll be dealing with the main, like, Earth 616 one that most people know. Or it could be that one, since this show seems to be dealing outside of time. Really anything is possible, and then in the timeline as it's unfolding in the eyes of the TVA is how it's supposed to, that could just be either the same or, like I said, a different Kang.
Yeah, there's also a Kang that becomes Immortus. And I'm sure they're gonna get it, like, reveal. So I think a lot of people assume that the three statues were the Living Tribunal, and that was gonna be the version of the Living Tribunal who, like, runs the 616 comic Marvel universe. And maybe the Living Tribunal is folded into the Timekeepers in this. But it could all just be like a propaganda video where, like, yeah, don't worry, we're in charge of the time stream, but they're probably going to get breached in some way, and this show's going to deal with that, and they're probably going to get their, like, technology stolen, and that's going to lead into the Kang or whoever the time-traveling menace is that's going to, like, warp things around. And
I noticed at the very end when they were in somewhere Oklahoma, 1845 or whatever it was, there was something buried in the sand or whatever that I think is going to be significant, and it looked almost like a Keyblade looking thing, but it had what looked like a clock on it, and I'm thinking that could be MCU's version of the Kang chair. I don't know if they want to necessarily have a villain floating around in a hover chair that can manipulate time streams, so maybe it, like, looks cooler and more menacing to have a Keyblade looking rifle thing that has to deal with time. I almost wonder if that has something to do with Kang, although they did kind of hint that whatever that was actually like a TVA weapon. I'm wondering about that. Maybe that's the new Kang time chair or whatever.
Or Kang gets it from them, or whoever gets it from them. I've also read that that's supposed to be Loki's Sword of Truth weapon from, like, the future. Or some, like, future version of the Twilight Sword.
Surtur?
Surtur, yes. Yeah, like, Surtur's Twilight Sword. It could be some, like, souped-up alternate or, like, future version of that. Because Asgard, they did, like, an actual Ragnarok story in the comics. And so, like, Thor and all the Thor characters weren't around for a couple years. That's why none of them intervened with, like, the comic version of Civil War. But then eventually Asgard shows back up in Oklahoma, and it's, like, floating above it. Norman Osborn tries to orchestrate this big, like, invasion of Asgard, and it was supposed to be an allegory for, like, the war in Iraq and all that. But that was, like, 10, 12 years ago, and it was called Dark Reign, where, like, he had his Dark Avengers and he was in charge of S.H.I.E.L.D., and then he tried to invade Asgard. But then there's also already an Asgard on Earth in present MCU time, so I don't know if that's gonna connect in some way.
Do you think that this show is going to at all connect with like the power broker concept that they introduced in the Falcon and Winter Soldier? Or do you think this is going to be its own separate thing? I think a lot of people are assuming that this show is going to directly lead into the either Spider-Man or even like the Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, because they did hint at multiverse and chaos/madness. They did kind of use all the title words of the Doctor Strange movie at different points in this episode. So I don't know if that was by design or coincidence. I think right now I'm kind of operating under the assumption that this is all going to be its own separate thing. And I also think that we're meant to take Loki as like the hero of this show. But it seems to me like whatever they do in the show over the course of 6 episodes is going to fail, because obviously the Doctor Strange movie has to happen. So I think whatever the TVA is, whatever their goal is in this show over the course of 6 episodes, I think more than likely it's going to fail.
Yeah, someone's gonna like steal or like sabotage the TVA in some way, and they're not gonna be as all powerful as they're leading on. And possibly whoever ends up becoming the power broker is some like defecting TVA agent who like knows the future and like uses their knowledge of time to manipulate things. The power broker could be this other Loki. It could be a lady Loki. Another maybe far-fetched thing, there's a Marvel team called the Lady Liberators, and it's really like Captain Marvel and like Spider-Woman and like She-Hulk and like an all-female Avengers. I think Wasp was on there. But like Lady Loki could form her own like evil version of the Lady Liberators and have recruited like Valentina and Sharon Carter and other like women to be like this evil cabal of people manipulating world events and using time and whatever resources for their gain.
Do you have any other thoughts or hopes as to who the main villain of this could be? My only other celestial thing that I could think that might be doing something to mess with the timeline, probably just for their own pure entertainment, would be like Beyonder or something like that. I know that they're trying to probably do a Secret Wars eventually, so I don't know if this is like a first tease at Beyonder, and then when they eventually get around to doing the Secret Wars, it'll be like, oh, well, I tried it this way, and then I just decided to rip apart a bunch of different worlds and create this battle planet just to see what would happen. And then the other thing I could think is like, they still haven't done Enchantress in any capacity yet in the MCU, as far as I know. She likes to mess with people, usually just to try to get Thor's attention. I know in this case, Thor is kind of being phased out and becoming Jane Foster, but I know there is obviously Thor content forthcoming in the near future, so I don't know if they're going to kind of introduce her, but I don't know if she's even rumored to be in the next Thor, so that's just another kind of far-fetched thing.
They're saying in Thor 4 they're going to introduce the Greek pantheon. Like Russell Crowe is supposed to play Zeus, which that could just be like misdirection or whatever. But like if they're fighting the Greek pantheon, they're probably going to introduce Hercules, and he'll take the bruiser role that Thor would have had. The instructional video about how there was a big multiversal war before is probably like a foreshadowing of the Secret Wars, and like we kind of have to take them at their word that actually did happen back then. But then whoever messes things up now could like cause things to cascade out of control and cause a big multiversal war that we get to see, which will probably be heavily based on like Secret Wars or Secret Wars Battle World.
When they were in that little, like I said, Secretary of State type room, and then that kind of side gag guy that was like, I tried to get a ticket or whatever, or like, they used this like incinerator rod looking thing. I think we're meant to believe that he just kind of was blasted out of existence. My thought when I saw that was like, yeah, that's possible that was just a one-off joke for comic relief or whatever, but I almost wonder if it's a kind of concept like they had in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, where his particles were like scattered across different realms, or just basically like transported somewhere else, just like kind of how they had it in Willy Wonka with Mike TV. I'm almost wondering if like when they're jumping around on different timelines trying to solve things, I wonder if we're going to like run into him again, kind of like similar to what they did in Willy Wonka. I'm almost wondering about that.
So the variants is like a gag on variant covers for like comic collectors and comic speculators and whatever. In the She-Hulk series, it goes into how the TVA like takes people into and out of continuity, and they just kind of get stored in a vault. So whoever these people they are that they're erasing, they just have stashed away somewhere. Just like they have extra like Infinity Gems stashed away that they can put into the timeline to like make things stream nicely and like fit together nicely. They could pretty much bring in any character that they just said they had, like, that they had out of continuity or, like, had erased, and, like, put them into the time stream.
Do you think that particular guy that was causing a stir or whatever, do you think he's just a one-off thing, or do you think he's a bigger deal than what we might have been led to believe? And also, the way that they had a bunch of Infinity Stones in drawers, like they weren't a huge deal, I'm almost wondering if when what we saw in Endgame when Captain America, quote-unquote, like went back to put all the stones back where they were, I'm almost wondering if the TVA stepped in and was like, we'll take those, and then just placed him back in Peggy Carter's timeline and allowed him to, I guess, complete his path. Like, they wanted him to end his time stream, like, with Peggy Carter, and then obviously, when his set path or whatever came to fruition, then he was elderly looking and passed on his mantle to Falcon. I almost wonder if that's going to come up at some point in this show. That seems like that would piece together.
Probably. And if they have extra Infinity Gems, then they probably just have, like, extra Mjolnirs hanging around and extra Cap shields.
So I guess since we kind of had both Star Wars and Marvel in this episode in bits and pieces, I guess the last thought would be, like, do you have any predictions for episode 2 of Loki, or what episode 8 of Bad Batch might hold?
Well, for the future episodes of Loki, they're probably gonna, like, tease at, like, some of the dystopian features from the comics timelines. There's been some buzz that, like, people want to see, like, Mark Ruffalo show up old and, like, evil as the Maestro, and that, like, they have to, like, do some hijinks to, like, stop that from happening. Or, like, there's in the trailers that shows, like, the reference to the Vote Loki miniseries where he runs for president. So we're probably going to see that somewhere along the line, and that's probably going to be some gag to get the attention of this other Loki. Another thing that could happen is Hela in Norse mythology is Loki's daughter, I think. So they could do something where this other alternate and maybe female Loki is going around in time and, like, hooks up with a frost giant to give birth to the Loki that we know. And these time-traveling Lokis are, like, giving birth to themselves and putting themselves into different points in time. Because there's all, like, we already saw the D.B. Cooper gag where, like, oh, that was actually Loki.
Any thoughts on Bad Batch or no?
Rex probably isn't the original cloaked figure. He's just another guy wearing a cloak.
I like those educated predictions. Those of you that are still listening are probably checking the timestamps, thinking yourself, hasn't he been saying last thing for the last, like, 15 minutes? We obviously have very different definitions of last thing, pal. But anyway, going back to the Secret Wars thing, if for no other reason, I want to see a Secret Wars happen just because I want to see Spider-Man absolutely wreck the X-Men. The other thing, this is the last of the last things, I promise. I just wanted to say, and this probably goes without saying, that Tom Hiddleston's performance was absolutely superb. I thought this whole show could have just been a Tom Hiddleston monologue, and I probably would have enjoyed it equally. I'm glad that he was cast as Loki. He's one of those, like, you could never see the person as anything else. Like, you could never see Loki as anything else besides Tom Hiddleston. He's that good in the role. Tune in next week. We'll have this same format. I think it'll work well. We'll probably spend a few minutes on Bad Batch, and then we'll primarily be talking about Loki, and that'll be kind of the format for the next 5-6 weeks or so. Thanks for listening. Catch you in the next one.